It was a sunny Saturday morning, and I was in the garden with my husband, Mark. I loved mornings like this, quiet, calm, and peaceful. Mark was busy trimming the hedges, and I was watering the flowers. Our little garden looked so nice. I loved the colors of the flowers, the fresh smell of the soil, and the soft sound of birds singing. Then I heard a voice behind us. "Hello, are you the neighbors?" I turned and saw a woman standing by the fence. She had a big, bright smile, and her eyes sparkled with energy. She looked about our age with dark hair and a friendly face. I smiled back, trying to be polite. "Hi," I said. "Yes, we live here. I'm Emma, and this is my husband, Mark." The woman stepped a little closer. "Nice to meet you. I'm Sarah. I just moved in next door," she said, her eyes flicking to Mark with a smile. "It's so nice to meet my new neighbors." Mark looked up from his work and waved. "Hello, Sarah. Welcome to the neighborhood." Sarah's smile grew wider. "Thanks. I was a bit nervous moving here alone, but it's great to see friendly faces." She looked around, admiring our garden. "Wow, your garden is beautiful. Did you do all this yourselves?" Mark nodded. "Yes, we enjoy working on it together." "Oh, you must be very good at it," she said, her eyes focused on Mark. "I don't know much about gardening, but I'd love to learn. Maybe you could teach me sometime." Mark laughed a little, and I felt a small twist in my stomach. I couldn't quite explain why, but something felt off. I shook it off, thinking I was just being silly. She was just being friendly. The next day, I was in the kitchen when I saw her again. This time, Sarah was standing in our garden, holding a small basket. She waved at me through the window, and I went outside to see what she wanted. "Hi, Emma. I made some cookies," she said, holding out the basket. "I thought you and Mark might like some." "That's very kind of you," I replied, a little surprised. "Thank you." She smiled and handed me the basket. "It's nothing, really. I love baking." Then she looked around as if searching for something. "Is Mark around?" "He's at work," I answered, feeling a bit uncomfortable. "Oh, I see. Well, tell him I stopped by," she said with a sweet smile. "I'll see you both later." I watched her walk back to her house, feeling a strange sense of unease. Why did she need to see Mark? She had brought cookies, but it felt like an excuse, as if she had come to see him and not me. I brushed the thought away, telling myself that I was being paranoid. She was new and just trying to make friends. But over the next few days, I saw her more and more often. Every time I looked out the window, it seemed like Sarah was there, smiling and waving. And every time she seemed to be looking for Mark. One afternoon, she saw him outside and came over right away, holding a small plant in her hands. "Mark, can you help me with this plant?" she asked, her eyes wide with interest. "I don't know where to put it, and I thought you might have some advice." Mark looked at me, then at Sarah. He shrugged and walked over to her, taking the plant from her hands. "Sure, let me take a look," he said. I watched as they talked, and I felt that strange feeling in my stomach again. Sarah was leaning a little too close, laughing a little too much, and looking at him in a way that made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't want to be jealous. I trusted Mark, but I couldn't shake this feeling. Later that night, I told myself I would talk to Mark about it. I sat beside him on the couch, watching him read a book. He looked so relaxed, so peaceful, and I felt a bit silly for feeling worried. But I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "Mark," I said, breaking the silence, "have you noticed that Sarah comes over a lot?" He looked up, confused. "Sarah? You mean the new neighbor?" "Yes," I said slowly. "She's always around. It seems like she's always looking for you." Mark chuckled. "Emma, she's new here. She probably just wants to make friends. Besides, I'm just helping her with a few things." "Don't worry." His words didn't help. I knew he wasn't worried, but I couldn't help feeling that something was off. Every time I saw Sarah, I felt like she was trying too hard. And every time Mark laughed it off, I felt even more alone with my worries. The next day, I decided to let it go. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe she was just friendly. But that afternoon, I saw her again, walking straight to our house with a big smile on her face. She was holding something wrapped in a cloth, and I knew she was coming to see Mark again. She saw me through the window and waved. I waved back, trying to smile, but I felt that twist in my stomach return. It was as if she wanted to be part of our lives, slipping in whenever she could, as close to Mark as possible. "Hi, Emma," she said as I opened the door. "Is Mark home?" I shook my head. "He's still at work." Her smile faded, just for a second, but then she laughed. "Oh well, I'll come back later." As she walked away, I stood there, watching her, wondering what she wanted and why she was always so interested in my husband. I felt a small shiver run through me. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it, and Mark didn't see it. I decided I would keep watching. If she came over again, if she acted too friendly, I would find a way to make her stop. I wasn't sure how yet, but I knew I couldn't ignore this feeling any longer. A few days later, I was in the living room when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it and, of course, there was Sarah standing there with a big smile on her face. "Hi, Emma," she said, holding a small basket in her hands. "I made some more cookies. I thought Mark might like them." I forced a smile and took the basket. "Thank you, Sarah. I'm sure he'll appreciate it." Sarah looked past me into the house, as if searching for something, or someone. "Is Mark here?" she asked, her eyes bright. "No," I replied, feeling my stomach twist. "He's at work." "Oh," she said, looking disappointed. "Well, I'll come by later then." She turned to leave, and I closed the door, my mind buzzing with questions. Why did she want to see him so much? Why did she keep coming over, bringing things like cookies or asking for help with little tasks? It felt strange, as if she was looking for excuses to be near him. That evening, when Mark came home, I handed him the basket of cookies. He looked at them and laughed. "More cookies from Sarah?" he asked with a smile. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "She came by again, looking for you." Mark shrugged. "She's just friendly, Emma. There's nothing wrong with that." I wanted to say something, to tell him how uncomfortable I felt, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to seem jealous or silly, but deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. I knew that something was wrong. The next day, I was in the kitchen when I saw Sarah outside again. She was standing by the fence, looking over at our house. I watched as she spotted Mark in the garden and walked over to him right away. She was holding something small in her hands, like a tool or a broken piece of something. I moved closer to the window, listening as she spoke to him. "Mark, could you help me with this?" she asked, holding up the item. "I don't know how to fix it." Mark smiled and nodded, taking the item from her. "Sure, let me take a look." I watched as he examined it, explaining something to her while she nodded and smiled. She was leaning a little too close to him, laughing a little too much at everything he said. I felt my heart sink. I wanted to go outside, to pull him away, but I knew that would look strange. I had no reason to stop him from helping her. When he came back inside, I tried to talk to him again. "Mark," I said softly, "do you think Sarah comes over too much?" He looked at me, a bit surprised. "Emma, she's just a neighbor. She doesn't have anyone else around here. She's probably just lonely." I sighed, feeling frustrated. "But it's like she's always looking for you, not me." Mark shook his head and laughed lightly. "You're overthinking it, Emma. She's just friendly. Don't worry." His words stung. I didn't feel like he understood. To him, this was all harmless, but to me, it felt like a threat. I didn't want to lose him, and I didn't want this strange woman coming between us. Over the next few days, Sarah's visits continued. She found more reasons to come over, more excuses to talk to Mark. One day it was a broken light bulb. Another day, it was a picture she wanted to hang on her wall. Each time, she would ask for Mark's help, and each time, he would go over and help her. I watched from the window, feeling helpless, feeling like I was disappearing. One afternoon, I decided to confront her myself. I saw her outside, trimming the bushes by her house, and I walked over. "Hi, Sarah," I said, trying to sound friendly but firm. She looked up, surprised. "Oh, hi, Emma. How are you?" "I'm fine," I replied. "I wanted to talk to you about something." She looked at me, her eyes curious. "Sure, what is it?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I've noticed that you come over a lot. You seem to always be looking for Mark." She blinked, then gave a little laugh. "Oh, Emma, I'm so sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I didn't mean anything by it. I just, I just don't know many people here, and Mark is so helpful." Her words sounded innocent, but something about her smile didn't feel right. I nodded, not wanting to push too much. "I understand," I said slowly. "But maybe it's better if you try to solve some of these things on your own. Mark is busy, you know." Sarah's smile faded a little, and for a second, I saw something different in her eyes. A flash of irritation. But then she quickly put on her friendly smile again. "Of course, Emma," she said sweetly. "I understand completely. I'll try not to bother him too much." I nodded and turned to leave, feeling a small sense of relief. Maybe she would back off now. Maybe things would go back to normal. But the next day, Sarah came over again. This time, she brought a cake. A big chocolate cake that she handed to Mark with a smile. "I made this for you, Mark," she said, her eyes bright. Mark looked surprised but pleased. "Wow, thank you, Sarah. That's very nice of you." She glanced at me, giving me a small smile. "I just wanted to say thank you for all your help, Mark. You've been so kind." I watched as they spoke, feeling anger and frustration build up inside me. I had asked her to stop coming over so much, to stop asking for his help. But here she was again, smiling and giving him gifts, acting as if I didn't even exist. That night, I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I sat down with Mark and told him everything. "Mark, I don't like how Sarah is always around you," I said, my voice tense. "She's too close, too friendly. It doesn't feel right." Mark looked at me, his expression softening. "Emma, I don't think she means any harm. She's just a neighbor. Maybe you're reading too much into this." I shook my head, feeling the frustration rise. "No, Mark, it's more than that. She acts like she wants you to be her husband, not mine." Mark sighed, looking tired. "Emma, please, let's not make this into something it's not. She's just a lonely woman trying to make friends." I looked away, feeling defeated. He didn't see it, didn't understand. To him, this was all innocent, harmless. But to me, it felt like I was losing him, bit by bit, to this woman who smiled too much and came over too often. I knew I couldn't change his mind, not yet. But I decided that I wouldn't ignore it anymore. If she came over again, I would be watching, ready to protect what was mine. Days passed, but I couldn't shake my worries. Sarah kept coming over, finding new excuses to talk to Mark or bring us things. I felt more and more uncomfortable, and each time I saw her at our door, my heart sank. She was crossing a line, and it felt like she knew it. But each time I brought it up with Mark, he just brushed it off. I didn't know how to make him see what I saw, how to make him understand what I felt. One evening, I decided I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I sat down next to him after dinner, took a deep breath, and tried again. "Mark," I said quietly, "I don't feel comfortable with Sarah coming over so much. I don't like the way she acts around you." He looked up from his phone, a little surprised. "Emma, we've talked about this," he said gently. "She's just a neighbor. She doesn't mean anything by it." "But Mark," I insisted, feeling the words rise up, "she's always asking for your help. She brings things just for you, and she barely looks at me. Don't you think that's a little strange?" He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You're overthinking, Emma. She's just friendly. Maybe she feels a bit alone." I felt a wave of frustration and hurt. I was trying to protect our relationship, trying to show him that something was wrong. But he couldn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to see it. I didn't want to push him too hard, but I felt like he was slipping further away, and I was left standing alone with my worries. The next afternoon, I was in the kitchen, trying to keep myself busy, when I saw Sarah walk into our garden again. This time, she was holding a small photo frame in her hands, and she was smiling. My stomach twisted as I watched her approach Mark, who was working on a small project outside. I stepped closer to the window, watching and listening carefully. "Mark," she called, holding up the frame. "Can you help me hang this picture? I just can't get it right." Mark looked up, nodded, and walked over to her, taking the frame from her hands. He didn't notice me watching, but Sarah looked around, and for a second, I thought she saw me through the window. But she quickly turned back to Mark, smiling and talking in a low voice. They walked over to her house together, and I stood there, feeling helpless and frustrated. She was pulling him closer, little by little, and I didn't know how to stop it. I knew I had to do something, but I felt like nothing I said would make a difference. Mark didn't believe me, and Sarah knew exactly how to get what she wanted. After about half an hour, Mark came back inside, looking relaxed and happy. "Sarah needed help with her picture," he said, as if explaining himself. "She just can't do it alone." I forced a small smile, but inside, I felt like screaming. I wanted to shout, to tell him to wake up, to see what was happening. But I knew that would only push him further away. So I stayed quiet, letting the anger settle deep inside. The next few days were quiet. Sarah didn't come over, and I started to feel a little better. Maybe my talk with her had worked after all. Maybe she understood that I wasn't going to let her keep coming over. But I still felt uneasy. I couldn't trust that she would really stay away. And I was right. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I saw Sarah walking toward our house again. This time, she was holding a small bottle of wine and 2 glasses. My heart sank. She didn't just want to see Mark. She wanted to sit with him, talk to him, share something special. I felt my face grow hot with anger as she knocked on the door. Mark opened it, looking a bit surprised. "Oh, Sarah," he said, smiling. "What's this?" She held up the wine and laughed. "I thought we could have a little drink to celebrate." "Well, just being neighbors." Mark hesitated, looking back at me, and I felt my whole body tense. I stepped forward, forcing a smile. "Actually, Mark and I were about to have our own evening together," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe another time, Sarah." Sarah's smile faltered. Just for a moment, I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Disappointment? Annoyance? But she quickly covered it with a sweet smile. "Oh, of course," she said lightly, placing the wine bottle on our table. "Well, this is for both of you then. Enjoy your evening." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the wine on the table. I felt a small sense of victory, but also a lingering worry. She wasn't giving up. She was just being patient. I could see it in the way she smiled, in the way she lingered for just a moment too long. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. I didn't know how to make her stop. I felt like I was losing control, like she was slowly slipping into my life, taking over my place. Mark was too kind, too trusting to see it, and I didn't know how much longer I could handle this. I knew I had to do something. I had to protect what was mine. And if that meant confronting her head-on, then I was ready. I didn't want to lose Mark, and I wasn't going to let her take him from me. The next day, I woke up feeling ready to take action. I knew that I couldn't just sit back and watch Sarah try to get closer to Mark. I had tried talking to her, and I had tried talking to him, but nothing seemed to work. I realized that if I wanted to protect my marriage, I had to show them both that I wasn't going to ignore this anymore. I decided to keep an eye on Sarah, to watch her carefully. If she slipped up, if she showed even the smallest hint of her true intentions, I would be there to see it. I would show Mark that I wasn't imagining things, that Sarah was trying to get too close. That afternoon, I was in the garden, pretending to water the plants, but really, I was watching the street. I knew she would come by at some point. It was only a matter of time. And, sure enough, after a while, I saw her walking toward our house with a little package in her hands. She waved at me as she approached, her usual big smile on her face. "Hi, Emma," she called out. "Is Mark home?" I kept my face neutral, trying not to show any emotion. "He's inside," I replied. "But he's busy right now." "Oh," she said, looking a little disappointed. "I just wanted to give him this." She held up the package. "It's some homemade bread. I thought he might like it." I forced myself to stay calm. even though I could feel anger bubbling inside me. "That's nice of you, Sarah," I said. "But he's very busy with work. He might not have time for all these visits." She gave me a small smile, as if she understood but didn't really care. "Of course, Emma. I just wanted to be friendly. I don't mean any harm." I watched her carefully, trying to see if there was something hidden behind that sweet smile. But she just stood there, acting perfectly innocent, like she didn't understand why I would be uncomfortable. It made me even more frustrated, but I knew I had to stay calm. I couldn't let her see that she was getting to me. "Thank you for the bread, Sarah," I said, taking the package from her. "I'll make sure Mark gets it." She nodded and turned to leave, but just as she was walking away, I saw her glance back at the house, her eyes lingering for a moment longer than necessary. It was just a small look, but it felt like a warning. She wasn't done yet. She would be back. That evening, when Mark came home, I gave him the bread and told him what had happened. "Sarah came by again," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She brought this for you." Mark took the bread, looking a little surprised. "She really goes out of her way, doesn't she?" "Yes," I replied, watching his face carefully. "She's very interested in you." He laughed lightly, shaking his head. "Emma, she's just being friendly. You don't need to worry." But I did worry. I worried every time I saw her, every time she came over with another excuse. She was like a shadow, always there, always watching. I felt like I was in a battle, and Mark didn't even see it. The next day, I decided to be more direct. I waited until Sarah came by again, this time with another excuse. She was holding a small potted plant, asking if Mark could help her find a place for it in her garden. I knew it was just another reason to see him, to talk to him. I walked out to meet her, blocking her path before she could reach the door. "Sarah," I said firmly, "I need to talk to you." She looked a little surprised but smiled. "Of course, Emma. What is it?" "I don't think it's appropriate for you to keep coming over so often," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Mark and I have a life here, and it feels like you're trying to insert yourself into it." Her smile faded slightly, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Annoyance, maybe even anger. But she quickly covered it with her usual sweet expression. "Oh, Emma," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I just don't have anyone else here. It's hard being in a new place, you know?" I looked at her, trying to see the truth in her eyes. "I understand that, Sarah. But there's a line between being friendly and being intrusive." She nodded slowly, looking down at the plant in her hands. "I see," she said quietly. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line. That was never my intention." But as she spoke, I felt a strange feeling. Her words sounded right, but something about her tone felt wrong. It was almost as if she was mocking me, pretending to be sorry when she didn't really care. I watched her carefully, trying to figure out what was real and what was fake. "Well," I said, feeling a bit more confident, "I hope you understand. Mark and I just need some space." She looked up at me, her smile returning. "Of course, Emma. I'll be more careful. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." I watched as she turned and walked away, feeling a mix of relief and unease. I had finally said what I wanted to say, but I didn't feel better. If anything, I felt more worried. Her smile, her words, they didn't feel honest. It was like she was playing a game, pretending to listen while planning her next move. That night, I lay awake, thinking about everything that had happened. I knew I had done the right thing by confronting her, but I also knew it wasn't over. Sarah wasn't going to just give up. I could feel it in my bones. As I drifted off to sleep, I promised myself that I would stay alert. I would watch her, and if she tried anything else, I would be ready. This was my life, my marriage, and I wasn't going to let her take it from me. A few days passed without any visits from Sarah. First, I felt relieved. Maybe my words had finally reached her. Maybe she understood that she was crossing a line. But a part of me knew that it was too good to be true. Sarah wasn't someone to give up that easily. I felt it in the way she had smiled at me that last time. A smile that didn't feel honest. A smile that hid something else. One morning, I looked out the window and saw Sarah in her garden. She was watering her flowers, humming to herself. I watched her carefully, studying her every move. She seemed happy, relaxed, but I couldn't trust that. I knew there was something more. She saw me looking and waved, her smile bright and cheerful. I waved back, trying to keep my face friendly. But inside, I felt tense, couldn't let my guard down. Later that afternoon, I heard a knock on the door. My heart sank. I knew it would be her. When I opened the door, Sarah stood there, holding a small notebook in her hands. "Hi, Emma," she said with a sweet smile. "I was wondering if you or Mark could help me. I'm trying to write down some recipes, and I thought maybe you had a few good ones." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Sarah, Mark is very busy today," I said, hoping she would take the hint. "I don't think he can help right now." "Oh, that's all right," she replied, not missing a beat. "Maybe just you, then? I thought we could sit together and talk. It's been a while since we've had some time. Just the two of us." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to close the door and end the conversation. But another part of me wanted to see what she was up to. Maybe, if I spent some time with her, I could figure out her true intentions. Maybe I could catch her slipping up, saying something that would reveal what she really wanted. "All right," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." She smiled and walked into the house, looking around as if she were inspecting every detail. We sat at the kitchen table, and she opened her notebook, flipping through the pages with a thoughtful look. "So, Emma," she began, her voice light and friendly, "how long have you and Mark been married?" 10 years, I replied, watching her closely. "It's been a wonderful time. We're very happy together." She nodded, smiling softly. "That's amazing. You two seem so close. It must be nice to have that kind of bond." I could feel something in her words, something that felt strange. Her tone was soft, almost too soft, like she was trying to be overly polite. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We're very close. We've been through a lot together, and it's made us stronger." She looked at me, her eyes studying my face. "You're lucky, Emma. Not everyone has that." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded, keeping my expression calm. I wanted to see where this conversation was going, to see if she would slip up. But she just smiled, writing something down in her notebook. "Do you have any favorite recipes?" she asked, changing the subject. "I'd love to know what you and Mark like to eat." I thought about it for a moment, then gave her a few simple recipes, things that Mark and I often enjoyed. She wrote them down carefully, nodding as if she was very interested. But as she wrote, I noticed something strange. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of concentration, almost like she was planning something. When she finished writing, she closed the notebook and looked up at me, her smile returning. "Thank you, Emma. You've been very helpful. I'll have to try these recipes soon." I forced a smile. "You're welcome." She stood up, giving me a small wave as she left. "See you soon, Emma." As soon as she walked out the door, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I had managed to stay calm, to keep my cool, but inside, I was full of questions. Why was she asking about our relationship? Why did she care so much about our favorite foods? It felt strange, almost like she was trying to learn everything about our life, trying to step into my world. That night, I told Mark about our conversation. I told him how she had asked about our marriage, our favorite foods, and how she seemed so curious about everything. He listened patiently, but when I finished, he just shook his head. "Emma, I think you're reading too much into this," he said gently. "She's probably just lonely and wants someone to talk to." I felt a wave of frustration. I wanted him to understand, to see what I saw, but he just didn't. To him, Sarah was just a friendly neighbor. But to me, she was something more, something dangerous. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on Sarah, watching her whenever I could. I saw her outside often, sometimes working in her garden, sometimes just sitting on her porch, looking over at our house. Every time I looked out the window, it felt like she was there, watching, waiting. Then, one evening, just as Mark was getting home from work, I heard a knock on the door. I opened it, and there she was again, holding a plate of cookies. her smile wide and bright. "I made these for you and Mark," she said, holding out the plate. "I thought you might enjoy them." I took the plate, feeling my stomach twist. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's very kind of you." She looked over my shoulder, her eyes searching for Mark. "Is he home yet?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, he just got back." She smiled, looking almost excited. "Oh, that's great. Maybe he could try a cookie now." I felt a wave of anger rise up. She was here, again, looking for my husband, acting as if this was her home, her place. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "I'll let him know," I said, closing the door before she could say anything else. I walked into the living room, where Mark was sitting on the couch, looking tired but content. I handed him the plate of cookies, explaining that Sarah had brought them over. He laughed softly. "She really likes baking, doesn't she?" "Yes," I replied, sitting down beside him. "She seems to like a lot of things about us." He looked at me, a bit confused. "Emma, are you still worried about Sarah?" I nodded, my voice soft but firm. "Yes, Mark, I am. I feel like she's trying to take my place, little by little." He sighed, putting an arm around me. "Emma, you're the only one for me. Sarah is just a neighbor, nothing more." I leaned into him, wanting to believe him, wanting to feel safe. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't over. Sarah wasn't going to stop. She was patient, she was careful, and she was watching, waiting for her chance. And I was ready too. I knew I had to be. A few days later, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had tried to be patient, to watch and wait, but I couldn't stand Sarah being so close, always watching, always finding ways to get near Mark. I needed to show Mark what I was feeling. I needed him to see the truth. That evening, I sat down with Mark after dinner. I took a deep breath, knowing this conversation was important. "Mark," I started, trying to keep my voice calm. "I know you think I'm overreacting about Sarah, but I need you to understand how I feel. I need you to see what I see." He looked at me, his face gentle. "Emma, I don't want you to feel this way. I'm here for you, and I only want to be with you." I nodded, appreciating his words, but I still felt the weight of Sarah's presence. "I know, Mark, but Sarah is trying to get too close to you, to us. She doesn't care about boundaries." He looked at me thoughtfully, as if he was finally beginning to see a little of what I was saying. "All right, Emma, I'll pay more attention. If she comes over again, I'll talk to her." I felt a bit of relief. At last, he was listening. He was starting to understand. The next day, just as the sun was setting, I saw Sarah coming toward our house. This time, she didn't have any gifts or excuses. She just walked straight up to the door and knocked. My heart started racing. I didn't know what she wanted, but I knew I was ready to face her. I opened the door, and before she could say anything, I looked her in the eyes. "Sarah, I need to talk to you." She looked surprised, her usual smile gone. "Of course, Emma. Is something wrong?" "Yes, Sarah," I said firmly. "I think you've been coming over here too much. You're always looking for Mark, bringing things, asking for his help. It's making me uncomfortable." Her face changed. For a moment, I saw something hard in her eyes, a flash of anger, but she quickly smiled, her voice calm. "Emma, I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I just thought we were becoming friends." I shook my head. "This isn't about friendship, Sarah. Feels like you're trying to get too close to my husband. I need you to stop." She opened her mouth to say something, but then she closed it, giving me a strange look. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Emma," she said, her voice cold. "I was just trying to be nice." I felt my anger rise, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you for understanding, Sarah. I hope you respect my wishes." She stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked away without another word. I watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and tension. I knew I had been strong, that I had protected my home, but I also knew that Sarah wouldn't forget this. There was something about her look, about her reaction, that felt like a warning. That evening, I told Mark about the conversation. I told him how I had asked her to stop coming over, to stop trying to get close to him. He looked at me, his face full of understanding. "I'm proud of you, Emma. You did the right thing." I felt a warmth inside me, a feeling of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew that I had taken a big step. I had stood up for myself, for my marriage, and I had shown Mark how much I cared. In the days that followed, things felt calm again. Sarah didn't come over, and I didn't see her in the garden or around the house. It was as if she had finally understood, as if she had finally accepted my words. Mark and I spent more time together, and I felt happy, safe, and loved. One morning, as Mark and I sat together in the garden, enjoying our coffee, he took my hand and smiled. "Emma, I'm glad you told me how you felt. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I squeezed his hand, feeling a rush of gratitude. "Thank you for listening, Mark. I just needed you to understand." He nodded, his eyes warm. "I'm here for you, Emma. Always." In that moment, I knew that we were stronger than ever. Sarah had tried to come between us, but in the end, she had only made us closer. I looked around at our garden, at the flowers we had planted together, at the life we had built, and I felt a deep sense of peace. I didn't know if I would see Sarah again, and honestly, I didn't care. I had done what I needed to do, and I had protected what was most important to me. I knew now that I could stand up for myself, that I could trust my instincts, and that I didn't need to be afraid. As we sat together in the soft morning light, I felt a happiness that I hadn't felt in a long time. My heart was full, my mind was calm, and I knew that, no matter what, I was ready for whatever came next.